All right, so this video is for period 7, CP Biology for Monday, April 20th. All right, so I said I would see you soon, so here I am again. So, what are the activities for today? Of course, don't forget to check in. If you go to the website, like I said before, let's see, I go to the website, period 7. It will give me an overview of what's expected from you during the week, plus what I expect from you for today. So click on week 2, 420 to 424. Today is 420. And once you're there, here's the calendar. And here is the overview for the week. And here we go. So once again, check in. That's 5 points for you guys. Then you have a presentation about classification of living things. And you'll be also choosing a plant and an animal. Some of you may have done this in the past. So this will be easier for those of you that have not done it. Just pay attention and you'll know what to do. Okay. If I keep going here, you'll see that for 422, it says here it will be updated on 422. And I do this on purpose because I don't want you to get ahead. Just focus on whatever is due today, and do your other work for your other classes for today, and hopefully you'll have some time to relax. It's something we need right now. All right, so let's move on. So according to these activities for today, you have the presentation and homework. By the way, this video, don't forget, will be under this presentation as soon as I'm done recording it. So here I go to classwork, period 7, and you will see today's assignment, classification, presentation, and homework. So I will go over the presentation first, and then I'll explain the homework. So here we go, classifying living things. And I mean, if I were in class, I would ask you right now how many things or how many living things are there in the world. And some of you may think thousands, hundreds of thousands. It's actually millions and billions, and less than half of that has been classified. Why do we classify things? They're just easier to find. Rather than saying all animals in the world belong in one section, or plants or protist, we try to make sure that every single living thing has its own place in the world. Just like you guys, if I order a book, there's a specific way from state to county to city to my address to my apartment in my street where those things would get to me. It's easier to find things. With an address, it's easier to find me or it's easier to find you. With this classification, guess what? It's easier to find a living thing, any type of living thing. Um, it's a very broad topic. If you study biology, you can become a taxonomist, someone who gives names to living things, and you can study where things belong. It's an exciting field. If you move on um, into new sections of the world, trying to find new living things, see where they belong. All right. Others use a space or a taxonomy to see if there are living things out there. How can we classify those things based on what we learned here on planet Earth? Um, but let's begin. Let's begin. It's not a new idea. Um, Here we go for some definitions. Classification is the process of grouping things based on traits, and we have talked about traits in length this year. Biologists use classification to organize living things, organisms. Like I said before, if you study classification, we call that taxonomy, and it's all right here. Just as a side note, biologists are not the only ones who classify things. Just about anybody in any field can classify things, objects, living things, rocks, types of air, easiest way of finding anything. And that's the whole point. All right, let's move on. So there's a system that we use now. It was made by this guy right here. I know he looks very colorful. Carolus Linnaeus. So from Sweden, and he developed a system. If I were to ask you right now, what is your name? You will say, my name is Carlos Lopez, Jose Sanchez, Maria Mendoza, or myself, Mario Santibanez. That has two names, and living things also have two names. If you think about a bicycle, bi, right here we call it a bicycle because it has two wheels. Living things have two names, so we call it binomial nomenclature. Once again, because there are two names. So where do they come from? They come from two things: something called a genus and something called a species. For example, this crab right here. Its scientific name is Calinectes sapidus, genus and species. But Mr. Santibanez, where does genus and species come from? It comes from this, the seven levels of classification, all right, which begins in kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species, of course. And we only use these two last sections, genus and species, to give something a name. Um, I know my son is called Mario Santibanez as well, but in living things, if you think about a one species, it's its own specific name, and no other living thing can be called that. So if I go back real quick, you see this crab? No other crab in the world can be called this. It's its own name, same species. In the future, we'll study what species are, and species are just living things that can reproduce with one another. If not, then they're not from the same species. But let's move on. So there's a system to classify things, and we use the economos keys. Um, Read this on your own. In my instructions, it tells you to watch this video and then read the whole thing. I don't like reading from presentations, all right? But it tells you what taxonomists have developed, all right? Um, for example, there are uh, taxonomous keys to classify vertebrates and invertebrates, and there are many living things, many types of animals that belong in these two sections, all right? I have here just a few, five vertebrate groups, the other groups and invertebrates. Using these keys, we can see where all animals belong. Beginning with the first question: do they have bones? Yes. Then boom, we go to vertebrates. Do they have a backbone? No. Then we go on to boom, invertebrates, and see where things belong. Just by asking questions: will this animal able to breathe underwater? Boom, go on to another section. Um, does this animal have scales? Boom, we go on to another section. All right. Um, based on these keys, we can actually make diagrams. All right, and let me explain this a little bit more. Bear with me. I'll be going for another 4 more minutes. Okay, for example, jaws. This means that from this point and on, all of these living things have jaws. Lungs. That means that from this point and on, all of these living things have lungs. Claws or nails. That means that from this point on, all of these living things have nails or claws. You got it? All right. Um, I'll be explaining a few more because you'll be making one of these on your own. Here's another one. So what does this mean? First question: does the animal have a backbone, vertebrates? Yes. Boom, it belongs to this section. Let me ask another question. Does it have a bony skeleton? Boom! It belongs to this section right here. All of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 species have a bony skeleton. Sharks, no, they don't have a skeleton. You're right. They have a cartilage. So it's just a very, very soft type of bone-like structure that maintains his body. We continue answering questions. Um, does this animal have four limbs, legs, and arms? Yes. Boom, it goes on to this section and so on and so forth. And then they're easier to find. Primates, amphibians, sharks, and so on and so forth. Let's move on. There are many types of trees. If we go on to primates, they have their own tree. All right. So if there's a primate, a few more questions. Where do they belong? In what species? And behind there, you'll find us in the same tree as them. It doesn't. It doesn't. This does not um, mean that we belong to the same species. We just belong to the same branch. Okay. All right, let's move on. So, following these branches, at the beginning, we can divide once again things into six kingdoms. It says five here, but it's actually six. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all with different traits. You don't have to know any of this, but you do have to understand that all kingdoms have different traits. Okay? So if I go on to here, bacteria, for example, Archaeobacteria, they're just simple one cell organisms. These guys are also simple one cell, but they're found everywhere. These guys are found in extreme environments, hot water, very salty places, even in the atmosphere. Protists, single cell, they eat, do the process of photosynthesis. A few more traits right there. They're not animals, but they eat. They're not plants, but they do the process of photosynthesis. They're not fungi, but they reproduce through spores. They're not bacteria, even though they're single celled. Pretty much whatever we have left over, kind of, will be protist. In the future, I'm sure that this will become another two or maybe three kingdoms. The more animals or living things that we find. Let's go on to fungi. A few more characteristics here, how they reproduce. Plants, few more characteristics there. Asking questions. Does this plant have flowers? Boom, it belongs to this branch. Does this plant loses its leaves in the winter? Boom, it belongs to another section of that tree that I've been talking about. Same thing for animals. Based on all traits, where do they belong? An animal is just simply a multicellular organism that eats, like you and I. All right, so now that we have gone over these 7 levels of classification, we talked a little bit about kingdoms. I know I was a little bit fast about the 6 kingdoms of living things, but let's come back to genus and species. Binomial nomenclature. 2 names. Here's a good way of memorizing this. You don't have to memorize it. Just understand that things get classified from something very broad to something very specific. Okay? Just like my address, United States, very broad. New Jersey, Bergen County, Hackensack, and then my street and my street number and my apartment, something very specific. How to find something? Where do they belong? Um, let's take this for example. The Sumatran tiger. Kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, meaning it has vertebrae. Class Mammalia, meaning drinks milk when it's young. Order Carnivora, meaning it eats meat. Questions. Family Felidae looks like a cat. Genus Panthera. species tigris. So, what is the name of this living thing? The Sumatran tiger, the specific name, the proper name, Panthera tigris, even though we may call it something else. All right, and that's it. Um, Email me if you have any questions. Read this whole presentation again, and go on to the homework that I'm going to explain it right now.